Hey guys, Pastor Tim here. Hope you're ready for another video from our youth group at Lighthouse Baptist Church. If this is your first time watching a video or you're trying to catch up on a missed lesson, we hope that this video is a blessing to you and helps you grow in your relationship with Jesus Christ.
All right, Genesis chapter 50, very last chapter in the book of Genesis. All right, and then can I get... Grace, can you go to Romans chapter 8, verse 28? All right, so today's lesson is called Good Can Come From Bad. We're continuing. We're almost towards the end of our series, It's Not What You Think. We'll probably take a break, obviously, for the Christmas party with a Christmas theme lesson and so forth. So we'll probably finish the series at the turn of the year. But today we're talking about good can come from evil. The whole point of this series, as you guys know, it's not what you think. It's looking at biblical principles that seem to go in the opposite of what the world teaches or what the world thinks. All right, so our text verse for today is, first I'm going to have Grace read Romans 8:28, which is probably a very familiar verse for most of you, but go ahead, Grace.
And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose.
All right, very good. We know that all things work together for good. All right, that doesn't just mean the good circumstances work to good, but as our lesson says, good can come from bad as well. God can work even our trials and even the uneasy circumstances of life for our good. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the life of Joseph. We're really going to summarize it in a lot of ways, but we're going to see how this principle is played out in the life of Joseph, which I think many of you are familiar with in the book of Genesis. But anyway, most of you are in Genesis 50, so let's look at a verse there that Joseph himself says that really encapsulates that same truth that we see in Romans chapter 8. And that is Genesis 50, verse 20. I'll read aloud, follow along with me. It says, "But as for you," so he's speaking to his brothers, "ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive." All right, so most of us, if given the choice, would avoid difficulty of any kind. All right, it's a human nature thing, the path of least resistance. But if we could make those choices, all right, we would miss out on the greatest good that God does in our life through trials. You guys heard me preach about this not too long ago. You've heard this kind of talked about many times if you've been in church for a while, but goodness comes from trials. That's how God grows us. So as we look at the life of Joseph, we understand he went through many trials, all right? Raise your hand. But what were some of the trials that Joseph went through? Grace? He got bullied by his brothers. Gage?
They threw him down a well.
They threw him down a well or a pit or something. Ethan? Slavery. So yeah, if we just go in order, you put your hands down. There was family dysfunction. Does anybody know what was the greatest source of the family dysfunction? Micaiah?
Jacob had a favorite son.
His favoritism, all right? Obviously, that's never works out. And actually, in all the patriarchs, if you don't know who those are, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, well, all the patriarchs, there was always a form of favoritism at play, and it never brought about anything good, all right? And in your own families in the future, it's not good to have favorites either, though we are all human. Yes, your parents are not perfect either. But there's family dysfunction, all right? God gave Joseph these special dreams. What were the main through line or the main thing that Joseph understood through those dreams? Josiah.
That Joseph's brothers would someday bow to Joseph.
Yeah, so the dream pretty much said, hey, Joseph, you are going to be in the future in this position of authority. You're going to be, and of course, because of that, your family is going to bow down unto you. His brothers, of course, take that as Joseph saying, I'm going to be in charge and rubbing it in their face, stuff like that. They didn't take it too well, and so as Gage said, they threw him down a well. Betrayal at the hand of his brothers. He was sold into slavery, as Ethan said. And then we see when he's in Egypt, whose house does he go into? Potiphar's house. We know the whole thing with Potiphar's wife. But we see the rise and fall in Potiphar's house. But through it all, he see his faithfulness. Even when he was thrown into prison after Potiphar's house, he was faithful to serve God. He later on interprets some dreams. Whose dreams does he interpret first? Mercy. Not Pharaoh, not him first. Joanna?
The baker.
And the...
Like fine keeper.
Come on, it's like a game of Clue. The baker and the butler, all right? Did it. Actually, which one did it? The baker did it. All right, so he interprets their dreams. This eventually gets him to the point where he interprets, as Mercy said, Pharaoh's dream, which eventually led him to save the world. And we see in verse 20 again, that's when Joseph understood that God had meant good through all of these ups and downs, which were mostly downs. All right, but through all the ups and downs that he faced in life, God meant it for good to save much people alive. All right, so he understood that good could come from bad and good did come from bad. And then at the very end, we see his forgiveness throughout and in the end towards his brothers. So when we look at the life of Joseph, we're going to look at 3 priorities that can keep us faithful, allowing us to still be serving God, the Lord, when he brings good from the bad in our lives. So our first point this evening, the first priority we want to have is to continue doing the will of God. All right, continue doing the will of God. Now, you guys have heard me talk about before, a lot of times we can misunderstand or we misconstrue what does it mean to be in God's will. And a lot of times we think of it as like the ultimate goal. All right, Robbie? All right, let's pay attention. All right. A lot of times we think of it as the ultimate goal, like what is my occupation? What is my future marriage going to be, and so forth. Those are more often the results of following God's will. All right. Following God's will is a daily, day-by-day effort on your part to follow God, serve Him, and grow in a relationship with Him. Okay? So, and we gave the example before, does God work like a GPS or does He work like a map? Just a GPS. A GPS tells you one step at a time. Go this far, turn left, and then it wants you to turn right, tells you to. It doesn't say the whole thing from the beginning. Now, how many of you would like to just know the whole thing from beginning to end? Like, God, just show me all the bends and turns and all the dips and valleys I have to go through. We would love that, but that's not how God works. God gives us one step at a time. So in doing that, you want to prioritize doing God's will, following Him, glorifying Him in all that you do, all right? And that will help you see the good or eventually come to understand the good, even when going through the bad or the thin times of life. So the first point under this is that God's will sends you to the right place, even if you don't think it's the right place. Okay, so let's think about Joseph for a second. Surely Joseph never thought the realization of his dreams, that he would someday be an authority, would come or would start with slavery in a foreign land. All right, do you think when Joseph had those dreams and he told his brothers, hey, I'm going to be in this position of authority one day, that he thought it was going to start with him being a slave? That's quite the opposite of being this person in authority, like a king or a governor. It's on the whole other side of the spectrum. All right, did God make a mistake? No. He could have easily thought that if he only stopped at the very beginning, when the first time the GPS says to turn right, and he sees that God led him to this place, could have been like, nope, God, you got it all wrong. Mess it up. I'm not going to follow your will anymore. All right, but then that would have taken him completely out of God's will, even though he had him in the right place. See, God's will doesn't always work the way we think it to. It will sometimes take us to unexpected places. All right, think about this. Where was Joseph when he finally gained an audience with Pharaoh that led to his ascension as the second in command of Egypt? Where was he when he finally met Pharaoh? Locke.
He was in charge of the prison.
He was in prison, all right? I wouldn't say he was in charge of the prison. He was given responsibilities and so forth, but he was in prison, okay? You wouldn't think that would be the place. And in fact, by that point, before he even met Pharaoh, he probably thought he was forgotten, all right? Because remember, when he interpreted the butler and the baker's dream, and it turned out the butler was innocent, the butler got to go free, it was 2 years that it took before the butler remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about him, all right? He asked him right when he was leaving, hey, remember me? He's like, oh, yeah, I'll remember you. And they forgot about him completely. He had his freedom. All right. And at that point, before he got to meet Pharaoh, you got to think maybe he had these thoughts of like, you know what? Maybe I'm just going to be in this prison for the rest of my life. I've been a slave here. I've been thrown into prison. Maybe I'm just supposed to be down here. But through it all, he faithfully served and followed God. And God, even in this unexpected place, had him right where he needed him to be. All right. Because that's when he finally met Pharaoh. See, Joseph didn't know how it would all unfold, but he knew this was where God had sent him. All right? You can trust that if you are following God, that you're striving each and every day to glorify Him, to serve Him, that even when it brings you into storms or into unexpected places, you're right where God wants you to be. All right? And if you're following God and you're right where God wants you to be, He can keep you safe even in those trying circumstances. Second point under this is that God's will has a good purpose. That's kind of hard to believe when you're thrown into a pit, but God's will has a good purpose, even being thrown into a pit, even being thrown into slavery, even being thrown into a prison. Joseph did not know the reasons, but he continued to serve God faithfully. Think about it this way. If Joseph at any point decided to be like, you know what, it's not worth it anymore, I'm just going to worry about myself, and got a little self-focused, at any of those three thrown down moments, think about it this way, he would not have fulfilled God's great purpose or God's good purpose through it all. If when he was thrown into the pit, and he's like, well, that's dumb, that's the last time I'm going to try to do what's right, or obey my father or whatever, and he just gave up then, yeah, he was eventually sold into slavery, but he probably wouldn't have been a very good slave, okay? The only reason he got to the position he did when he was in Potiphar's house because he was a faithful servant, because he loved God, and he wanted to serve his master to the best of his abilities. When he was thrown into prison, he could have been like, you know what, fine. You know what, I tried to do good. I got up to like this good position, even as a slave in Potiphar's house. And even then, Potiphar's wife lies about me and I get thrown into this prison. He could have quit then, been self-focused. But if he was self-focused, guess what he would not have recognized? He wouldn't have recognized two other prisoners who seemed to be agonizing over these dreams they had, and he would have just walked right on by them. He wouldn't have stopped to ask the butler or the baker what was troubling them. A person who's only focused on themselves is not concerned about what's bothering other people. You guys follow that? And if he was focused on himself, he would have missed his opportunity to interpret those dreams through the power of God, and he would have never been in the presence of Pharaoh a couple of years later. You guys follow this through line? Okay? God's will has a good purpose, even if it doesn't seem like it at that time. Our duty is through it all is to faithfully continue to serve God. See, the simple act of kindness that Joseph showed to those two men, all right, especially the butler, brought him before Pharaoh and set the stage for fulfilling God's purpose of delivering Israel from famine. Not Egypt. That was part of it, but ultimately it was to deliver God's chosen people, which was Joseph's family, from dying in a famine. That's what he says in chapter 50, verse 20. He says, God did this for me to save much people alive. Yeah, the present world at that time was saved because of Joseph, but also the future of Israel and all the people that came after that were saved because of Joseph. You guys follow? We may not understand why, but we need to remain faithful in serving him and understand that God reveals his purpose for our trials in his perfect time. Okay? All right, so our first priority when going through the thin times to understand that good's going to come out of it is to continue doing God's will. Our second priority is nurturing your walk with God. All right, or as we always say, nurturing your relationship with God. All right, so every day, understand this, every day God invites you into his presence, to walk with him, to grow in him, okay? Now, the first thing we want to understand is that walking with God keeps us from physical sin. All right, yes, it keeps us from sin in general, but in the life of Joseph, we see that walking with God keeps us from physical sin, okay? Obedience to God was more important to Joseph than a moment of sinful pleasure. All right? Does anybody know, what does Moses say about the pleasures of sin? They say they're but for a... No, you guys are raising your hands. Not Locke. All right, Drake. Yeah, it only lasts for a season. It's only fleeting. It's only a moment of sin. And Joseph understood that obeying God was more important than a moment of sinful pleasure. The fear of the Lord gave him the strength and determination to refuse Potiphar's wife. All right, turn over, if you're already in there, Genesis 39. All right, and the whole life of Joseph, you guys don't know, takes place really, starts in chapter 35. There's a little break shortly thereafter, but it picks up again in chapter 38 or 39 all the way to the end of the book. But chapter 39 is the temptation. Look with me in verse 5 to 7. And this is when Potiphar's wife is trying to tempt David to sin. And it says, and it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house. So when Potiphar made Joseph an overseer, and all that he had he put into his hand. I went back to verse 4. And it came to pass from that time that he made him an overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had save the bread which he did eat, and Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph and said, lie with me. So she's trying to tempt him. If we jump down really quickly, it says in verse 9, when she's tempting him again and again, this is what Joseph says. He says, there is none greater in this house than I. All right, being the second in command, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against Potiphar? Is that what he says? No, he says, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? The fear of God kept Joseph from falling to temptation, and it allowed him to continue to obey God and understand it's better to obey than enjoy the pleasures of sin. Think about this. For all that he has been through at this time, being his father's favorite son, in a leadership position at his father's home, to being thrown in a pit, betrayed by his brothers, and sold into slavery, which in all intents and purposes, they were probably selling him to his death, he could have at any moment been like, you know what, I deserve a little fun. I deserve just to let loose, to stop being such a good, but that wasn't Joseph. He remained faithful in obeying and serving God, even through the valleys of his life. Joseph refused because he knew he was not alone and that God was present. Secondly, walking with God not only keeps us from physical sin, but in some ways, more importantly, walking with God keeps us from emotional sin. Okay? For all that Joseph has been through, okay, what do you think are some of the emotional sins that Joseph could have easily fallen prey to? Joanna? Anger or bitterness. Micaiah? Self-pity. Micah? No, you're good. The main ones are anger and bitterness. All right, anger really becoming bitterness is the danger there. All right, Joseph's walk with the Lord kept him from bitterly holding on to hurts that he had in the past. All right, he could have easily held on to the memory of what his brothers did to them and how they hurt him and how they put him on this trajectory in life. But if he did that, he would never have ended up where God eventually had him as the second in command of the greatest nation in the world at that time. See, guys, understand, you can't do that in your own power. You can't just let go of the hurt other people have done to you in your own strength. You need the grace of God to help you do that. And your walk with God is going to help you accomplish that. Okay? It's like, if you want to compare your walk with God like with working out. Okay? When you start working out, okay, you're not going to all of a sudden get there. You're going to get to the let me just say, yeah, hopefully y'all know what a bench press is. But you're not going to go to the bench and you all of a sudden put on 3 plates on each side, which does anybody know how much 3 plates is? Any guesses? Not 175. Joanna? No, Nevea. What? 315. All right. So you can't go up to a bench, put 3 plates on each side, which is 315 pounds. All right. Nothing, way to go. And expect to all right, and just start repping it out. If that's your first time ever approaching a bench, guess what's going to happen when you try to do that? All right, you're dead. Okay. So where do you usually start when you want to do something like that? All right, you start with the bar. All right, believe it or not, especially if it's your first time ever lifting weights, you start with the bar. Why? Because you want to learn to form. All right, believe it or not, there's actually a form to doing the bench. All right, you're not just going out trying to get, no. You want to learn what you're doing. You want to learn how to position your body correctly. There's all these little things. So you start with the bar. You're learning to form. Once you get the form down, guess what you can do? You can start adding weight. Oh, do you start adding weight as fast as you can? No. All right, you slowly build up. All right, because you don't want to damage your muscles too quickly, too soon. All right, and guess what? After a year, are you at 315? Probably not, but you're going to be at a significant amount of weight. All right, and if you continue steadily, guess what's going to continue to increase for a while? The amount of weight you can do. And so when you approach the bar and somebody has 315 on there, instead of like what it was when you first started and you wouldn't even attempt to touch that, now that you've been doing it for a couple of years, guess what's not going to be so daunting to you anymore? Doing the 315. You're like, oh yeah, let's do it. Boom. And you knock it out. Okay? It's the same way when it comes to your walk with God. Okay? It's something you have to continue to nurture and grow day by day consistently. If during your time you're trying to learn how to bench, you take a couple months off, guess what's also going to go back down? Your bench. It's not going to stay at the same level because you need to consistently work at it. Your walk with God's the same. And as you continue to nurture your walk with God, all right, at first, you're not going to be able to handle all these big trials that come to your life probably in the best way because you're still learning, you're still growing in your relationship with God. But as you continue to grow and nurture that relationship, you'll be able to handle when somebody hurts you in a little better way. You're going to be able to handle when somebody despitefully uses you or when a trial comes in your life, and that means you'll be able to also let go of the hurts in the past and also have the power, as we see here, walking with God also gives you the power to forgive as well. It's very hard, right, Kale? It's very hard if you're not nurturing your walk with God and somebody does something to offend you or to hurt you. It's very hard for you in that moment to think, you know what, I can't hold on to this. I need to just forgive that guy. Why? Because you're not that mature in your faith. But if it's something you've been working on, you're nurturing and growing each and every day consistently, you're going to be able to look with perspective at that situation and be like, you know what? I can't hold on to this. It's only going to make me bitter. I just need to let it go and forgive them. Okay? That's the result of nurturing your walk with God. You guys follow me there? It doesn't only keep you from physical sin, but it also helps keep you from emotional sin. But the whole concept of nurturing, it has the idea of consistency. It's not something that you're just going to all of a sudden flick on when you're 18 and you're out of the house and you become an adult. It's like, all right, I'm going to take my walk with God seriously now. No, it's something you could start even today. Okay? I know Amethyst is the only adult here right now, but it's something that you can even start today and build up even as a teenager. All right, our last point for this evening is our third priority is trusting the ways of God. Trusting the ways of God. The same God who leads you into a trial will guide us through that journey. And the first way God does that, of course, is that God gives you guidance. Okay, what did Joseph have from God that would give him hope throughout all these trials he faced? We mentioned it at the beginning, and we see at the beginning of his narrative. All right, Gage? Dreams, all right, visions, or the dreams that God gave him. He understood that they were sent from God. And we understand the dreams were that he would one day be in this position of authority. Okay? Understand, this isn't anything new in his family. His father had these things as well, Jacob. All right? But you have to understand, that is probably what Joseph was holding on to throughout his whole time, going through the pit, the slavery, the prison, all those times he was probably holding on to those dreams that he knew God gave him. All right? God promised me that I'm going to be in this position. Really? From being a slave? Yeah, God promised me that. Really? From being a prisoner? Yes, I understand that's what God promised me as a young child. All right, you guys follow that? All right, so God communicated with Joseph through these dreams, and Joseph held on to those promises. What do we have today that we can hold on to when we face trials and so forth in life? Ethan.
Promise that God is with us
But where do we get that?
in the Bible.
In His Word. See, we have something much greater than dreams that Joseph got. All right, and we see this played out throughout the whole Bible and confirmed for us in the New Testament. We have the completed Word of God. All right, and in that we do have God's promises, like Ethan was alluding to there, that He will never leave us nor forsake us. And just as Joseph held to the promises that God gave him through dreams as a young child, we can hold on to the promises, all of them, that we see in God's Word when we go through trials as well in our lives. Psalm 23:8 says, I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way which thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye. And God guides us through His Word. All right, and our second way that we could trust God is that God gives you grace. I kind of alluded to this already, that it's the grace of God that helps us let go of bitterness, that helps us forgive, and understand that God's grace not only saves us, but it strengthens and sustains us through the Christian journey as well. Joseph trusted in God through the ups and downs, and God supplied him the grace to overcome every trial. Understand, in all of Joseph's situations, that when he went into Potiphar's house and when he went into prison, there was a phrase that was always said about Joseph wherever he went and wherever he decided to be faithful and serve God. Does anybody know what that phrase is?
You can interpret the dream.
Nope.
The Lord made him prosper.
It's along with the Lord made him prosper. It usually came before that. Quite simply put, it's often said in every situation that the Lord was with Joseph. All right, the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with him, sustaining him, giving him the grace he needed. That brought him into favor, as Jaden was alluding to, with Potiphar and with the keeper of the prison. All right, if you're going through a trial, embrace it as an opportunity to call upon God for his grace. Hebrews 4:16, let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. All right, so those are three priorities: doing the will of God, all right, nurturing your walk with God, and trusting the ways of God that can help us see the good, even in the bad times, that can come out by following God. All right, but understand this. It's only going to be revealed in God's perfect timing. When do you think Joseph finally understood God's perfect plan for all the things that he went through? There's not really like a great correct answer for this. You can surmise when it probably did come to mind. Micah?
When his brothers came to
That's probably when I would say it kind of dawned on him, like, this is what, because at the end when he finally reveals to his brothers in chapter, I think it's 41, when he finally reveals to his brothers, like, hey, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. So it wasn't probably until his brothers, and understand, at that point, he's accomplished or he might have thought he accomplished the dream God gave him because he was an authority, but it probably wasn't until his brothers came in seeking for help and he recognized them that he understood, oh, this is the good God meant. Not just to save my family, but to save God's chosen people, all those people that would eventually become not just the family of Israel, because remember Jacob was also called Israel, but the nation of Israel as well. And that's when Joseph finally understood, what God had me go through, all those low, bad times, God meant for good. And you know what? It's most likely during those moments when you're going through a storm, you're not going to understand the good God means in it. But if you're faithful in serving God, you will come out at the end and see how God meant it for good.